This video describes connecting the standard time desktop Windows client to SQL Server or SQL Express. Now, normally this is done for on-premise or locally hosted databases. If you're not using the standard time cloud, you're using on-premise, these would be the steps that you would go through. There's another video for setting up the web client. As you can see from the address bar, we're using a certain article. You can actually get that article and go through these step by step. The completion time should be about 2 hours, and when you're finished you should see the title bar look a little bit like this. It'll say SQL Server and then it'll tell the database that you're connecting to. So the first thing you'll have to do is check your server prerequisites, and you're going to need SQL Express or SQL Server, SQL Server Management Studio, .NET 4.8 or above. Of course that changes quite frequently. This says that you can run it on Windows 10 or Windows Server. 16 gigs gives you a little bit of breathing room. 500 gigs, 100 megabits per second. Those are all subjective, and this will pretty much run on any server. So you'll then have to go and set up your SQL Server or SQL Express. You'll need SQL Server Management Studio. You'll have to be able to connect to that, and you'll need to connect to whatever instance name. Then you can go into the top level item and choose properties. You're going to get a page that looks like this. This shows that you're allowing remote connections to this server. So the point here is that you'll be connecting the desktop version across your local area network to this server, which is considered a remote connection. The next thing you may need to do is go into security. You can see here that this article describes using a mixed mode SQL Server and Windows authentication. Of course, we definitely recommend that you're using Windows authentication only and not using SQL Server authentication. But the article shows that for simplicity. If you do change that, you'll have to then right-click on that top-level node and choose Restart. The next thing is the SQL Server Configuration Manager. That is the red toolbox icon, which you can see in the title bar here. You can run this little snap-in to start it up, or look in your Start menu. You then would go to SQL Server Network Configuration. You'll then select the instance that you're running. You can right-click and enable the TCP connection. If you double-click on that, you can also go in and enable that. Then you'll want to go to the IP addresses tab, put 1433 into the TCP port for TCP all, and that will enable traffic over port 1433 to your instance. If you make any changes there, you will have to then restart that server just by right-clicking. Then the other thing you may want to do is turn on SQL Server Browser. This is not internet browser. This is a browser service that broadcasts the SQL Server out on the network. You can do that by going into this SQL Server Services and then right-clicking on the SQL Server browser and then enabling that. The next thing you'll have to do then is open the Windows Firewall for SQL Server. Again, this is because you have a remote connection from desktop workstations to your server, and so the Windows Firewall on the server needs to be opened up for that. You're essentially going to go into Advanced Settings, Inbound Rules, create a new rule for port, and that port is going to be 1433. Allow those connections, and then you can name it something like SQL TCP 1433 so that you remember that, but the steps are shown in these screenshots here. You can see the port TCP 1433, allow the connections, and you may also want to do the same thing for UDP for 1434. That would be for the browser service. So sometimes these are necessary, sometimes not, but definitely open the 1433. After you've done all that, then you can actually go in and create a standard time database. Again, you'll be going back to SQL Server Management Studio. You'll right-click on Database and choose New Database. Name the database Standard Time. It's a common name that a lot of people use. You'll find it referenced in other parts of the documentation. So you can see the screenshot here is using this. Then simply click OK and you're done. You've created a database. But the next step is to create a SQL login so that you can access that database. You're going to go to the top level node. You'll see security, and then underneath that logins. You can right click on a login, choose new login. In this example, we're showing using the SQL Server authentication, which is not the most secure, but it is one easy way to get connected. You can later connect using Windows authentication if if you want to. We're definitely pointing out here that this is the more secure, but the example shows SQL authentication. We're creating a new login, setting the password to lowercase st, and we're setting the default database to standard time. Then going over to the user mapping, down to standard time, placing a check next to it so you have access to that, and then giving it DB_owner rights. Those are steps you will have to do even if using Windows authentication. Get that set up and you'll be ready then to create a credentials file. This is a text file that standard time will reference on the desktop, the workstation. It will be stored on the workstation and it will tell standard time where your database is. It turns out that you can create one of these using the control panel. So if you go into the control panel, System and Security, Administrative Tools, Databases app, and then you can create a file DSN in the file DSN tab. So you can see the file DSN tab here down in the screenshot. You can also just create a text file if you want to, but this is a way to create one of those text files by trying this on your workstation. So again, we're in the file DSN, we click add, name it standard time SQL. That is a magic name that standard time looks for. You can use any name, but that name is the best because standard time will look for that. Then you'll have to give it your server and then your instance name. In this case, again, you can see that we're using SQL authentication, which is not so great. We're using the login of ST and lowercase st, but again, Windows authentication above here is probably better. Keep sprinkling that throughout the documentation. Change the default database to standard time and give it a try by clicking finish and then test. If you have used SQL authentication, you actually have to go back into this text file, which will be stored in your documents folder, and put in this extra line pwd equals st. But if you're using Windows authentication, you don't have to do that. So you can see how insecure this is. Wide open security breach there. You may want to try this on your server first and then on your desktop so that you're eliminating the firewall possibility there. So now that you've created this credentials file and it is on your local workstation, you can then tell standard time where it is. You can open up standard time, choose file, database, click the ... button, then navigate to your documents folder and find this standard time SQL.dsn file that we created above. Then you should be able to connect and it will restart without any trouble. Then you will see the SQL server with the database name. If you want to copy this to other machines, you can then go into your documents folder, find this standard time SQL file after you've successfully connected one workstation, copy it to the documents folder of other workstations. That will allow them to connect to the same database. There is one last step. If you're using the bc.exe for barcode scanning, you can actually copy this credentials file to another Windows workstation, then go into your installation folder, which is probably something like Program Files, x86, Standard Time, Utilities. You'll find a BC folder, you can copy that, and you'll be able to use just that bc.exe for barcode scanning. That's it, a lot of steps. If you're installing the Standard Time Web Edition, you'll probably refer to this document first, get this set up first, get your database set up, then connect your Standard Time Web Edition to the same database. Let us know if you need help or refer to the document above.